The wealthy CEO who slipped into his cousin's place at a charity gala had absolutely no idea the woman already sitting across the table had done exactly the same thing. Grant Whitmore stepped into the Four Seasons Ballroom on King Street West and immediately wanted to leave. The Harborfront Gala for the Arts was the kind of event designed to make people feel both cultured and vaguely guilty, and the room delivered on both counts with a chandelier-to-human ratio that should have been illegal. He checked his watch. His cousin Rory had called 4 hours earlier, voice hoarse with what he claimed was a sudden flu, but sounded suspiciously like perfectly good health. "I can't make it," Rory had said. "There's a table reserved in the family name. You have to go. Whitmore Development is a sponsor. It'll look bad if nobody shows." "I have a presentation to prepare." "You always have a presentation to prepare. Go. Be human for one evening." Grant had no idea why everyone in his life seemed so invested in him appearing human. He was human. He simply preferred expressing that humanity through spreadsheets and quarterly projections, which were, he maintained, deeply emotional documents if you knew how to read them. Table 17 was in the center of the room. A woman was already seated there, and the moment Grant pulled out the chair across from her, she looked up with the expression of someone who had been caught doing something they weren't quite sure was legal. "Hi," she said. "You're not who I expected." "I'm not who I expected to be here either," Grant said. The woman tilted her head. She had sharp brown eyes and a faint smudge of paint across the left cuff of what was otherwise quite an elegant sleeve. Either she was an avant-garde artist making a statement about labor and formality, or she'd gotten dressed in a hurry. Grant suspected the latter. "Did someone put you up to this?" she asked. "My cousin," he said. "He claims he's ill." "My friend," she said. "She claims the man who broke her heart 2 years ago is going to be at this table, and she simply cannot." She paused. "I'm Sloane." "Grant." "Is the man actually here, Grant?" They both looked around. The other seats at table 17 were occupied by a retired senator, 2 people from a wealth management firm in Yorkville, and a woman who appeared to be asleep before the first course. "Apparently not," Sloane said. "So your friend sent you on a mission that didn't need to happen." "She has a flair for catastrophizing." "And you came anyway." Sloane straightened her cutlery with unnecessary precision. She sounded like she was going to cry. "I can handle a lot of things. Joe crying is not one of them." Grant looked at the menu. It was printed on paper thick enough to construct modest furniture. He read the first item twice. "What's a deconstructed terroir tasting journey?" Sloane looked at her own copy. "I think it's cheese." "Why can't it just say cheese?" "Because then they couldn't charge $300 a plate." Grant had spent the last 15 years navigating Toronto's most expensive restaurants without blinking. He was fairly certain he had never sat at a charity gala and discussed whether cheese was masquerading as something philosophical. He was also fairly certain he had never been this interested in a dinner companion in recent memory. "What do you do?" he asked. "I coordinate the Kensington Arts Hub," Sloane said. "Community arts programs, painting workshops, after-school classes for kids, music for seniors, that kind of thing." She glanced around the room. "Not exactly typical gala territory, honestly. Joe's the one who usually handles the fundraising side. I just run the programs." "And where is Joe tonight?" "Having a panic attack on my bathroom floor, last I heard." She said it without resentment, the way people describe the entirely predictable behavior of someone they love. "She'll be fine by morning. She always is." She set down her menu. "What about you?" "Property development," Grant said. "Oh." A small pause. "Big buildings or small ones?" "Usually large." "You don't sound enthusiastic." "I'm always enthusiastic," he said. Sloane looked at him with the directness of someone who had spent years working with children and had therefore lost all patience for polite untruths. "You sound like a man who answered that on autopilot." Grant opened his mouth, closed it. "Don't worry," Sloane said. "Most people do. It's the first question everyone asks and nobody actually listens to the answer." The soup arrived, a pale foam in a bowl the size of a cereal dish, garnished with what appeared to be a single herb and an existential question. "That's it?" Sloane said. "That's the first course," the server confirmed. She picked up her spoon. "In our after-school program, the kids made soup last Thursday. It took up half the bowl and tasted like your grandmother's kitchen. How was it? Incredible. She tasted the foam, made a diplomatic face. This is technically skilled. That's a very kind way of saying something unkind. I practice kindness, a small smile. It doesn't always come naturally. Grant laughed. It surprised him, a short, unguarded sound that felt like something he'd misplaced years ago and just found behind the sofa cushions. Sloane looked mildly startled, as though she hadn't expected that from him either. They talked through the rest of the first course and through the entree, which Sloane correctly identified as very small chicken with a serious self-image, and through what was, Grant had to admit, quite good dessert. She told him about a 7-year-old named Leo who had recently declared he was going to paint a mural of the entire solar system on the Arts Hub's back wall and had already completed Mercury and was deeply invested in the accuracy of Jupiter's storm patterns. Grant told her, and he wasn't entirely sure why, that he had once wanted to study architecture. What happened? Sloane asked. The business happened. He turned his wine glass slowly. My father retired early. The company needed someone. Do you regret it? I don't let myself think about it long enough to know. He meant it to sound decisive. Instead, it came out closer to the truth, and Sloane heard the difference immediately because her expression shifted in a way that made him want to look away. The Arts Hub, she said, changing direction with the tact of someone who recognized a door they shouldn't push. We've been fighting a development company for 8 months. They want the building. Our lease runs out in 4 months and they've been... She stopped herself, smiled, but thinner. Sorry. You didn't come to a gala to hear about my problems. I came to a gala because my cousin has dubious taste in excuses, Grant said. Tell me. She looked at him for a moment. Then, Whitmore Development has been trying to acquire the block on Augusta Avenue where we operate, mixed-use condominiums. 40 stories. Very sleek, I'm sure, she said, sleek the way other people said inadequate. They've been negotiated. The hub closes. 300 families lose programming. 12 staff lose jobs. She set down her fork. And 61 kids lose the only safe space they have after school. Something cold moved through Grant's chest. Whitmore Development, he said. Big company. Lots of glass in their logos. Sloane shrugged. They probably have a whole department specifically for not caring. Grant said nothing. He picked up his water glass, set it down. A very specific and unpleasant recognition was forming at the back of his mind. The Augusta Avenue file, the King West expansion package, the acquisition proposal he'd signed off on 6 weeks ago during a week when he had signed off on 11 other proposals and had trusted his VP of acquisitions to have done the necessary due diligence. He had not read it carefully enough. He was beginning to suspect he had not read it at all. Are you all right? Sloane asked. You went pale. Fine, he said. The word came out the way words do when they are covering for their opposites. Long day. When the gala ended, they stood outside on the pavement while October air came in off the lake and made both of them wish they'd brought warmer coats. The CN Tower blinked patiently to the south. A streetcar ground past on King Street. Well, Sloane said, that was a genuinely strange evening. It was, Grant agreed. I've never described chicken as having a self-image to a stranger before. I've never actually laughed at a charity gala before, Grant said. And then, because it was true and he was apparently saying true things tonight, not actually laughed. She looked at him. The streetlights were doing something unfair to her expression, softening it, or maybe just revealing what was already there. Good luck with your spreadsheets, she said. I mean that sincerely. I'm sure they deserve it. He almost called after her. He didn't. He stood on the pavement and watched her walk toward the streetcar stop and told himself it was just an evening. Just 2 people at a charity gala who weren't supposed to be there. He believed about 30% of that. Grant was at his desk at Whitmore Development by 6:30. The following morning, the Augusta Avenue acquisition file opened in front of him for the first time with his full attention. It took him 40 minutes to understand what he'd approved. It took him another 20 to understand what it meant. The Kensington Arts Hub occupied the ground floor of a 4-story building on Augusta Avenue. The acquisition proposal, drafted by his VP, Clifford Pratt, and approved by the board, recommended full demolition of the existing structure to make way for a 42-story mixed-use residential tower. Projected revenue, substantial. Community impact assessment, 3 paragraphs, all of them using the phrase manageable displacement, with a composure that Grant found increasingly offensive the longer he stared at it. 300 families, 61 children, 12 staff. The woman across the table at dinner last night. His assistant Vera arrived at 7:15 to find him still on the same page. She set his coffee down and looked at the file and looked at him and said nothing for 4 seconds, which in Vera's particular vocabulary meant she was being diplomatic. "I need everything on the Augusta Avenue file," Grant said. "Lease timelines, community consultations, alternative site assessments. Everything Clifford sent to the board." "Everything," Vera repeated carefully. "And I need to know when the board last reviewed it." "They voted to proceed 2 weeks ago." A pause. "You were in Vancouver." Grant closed the file, set up a review meeting. "Clifford won't like it." "No," Grant agreed, "he won't." The Kensington Arts Hub on a Tuesday afternoon was nothing like any building his company had ever acquired. The front room smelled like acrylics and orange juice. A teenager near the window was working on something large and abstract that looked like either a cityscape or a very emotional weather system. 2 seniors played cards in the corner with the fierce concentration of people who had nothing left to prove and knew it. Grant was standing in the doorway trying to determine whether entering counted as surveillance when a voice at approximately waist height said, "You look lost." He looked down. A boy of perhaps 8 was examining him with the frankly appraising expression of someone running a swift security check. "I might be," Grant admitted. "Are you from the city?" "Not exactly." "Are you a parent?" "No." The boy, who had paint on both elbows and the unhurried confidence of someone with a full social schedule, seemed to weigh this. "My name's Leo. I'm painting Jupiter." Grant looked toward the back wall. The planetary mural was well underway, and Jupiter was, he had to admit, impressively rendered. The great red spot had real depth to it. "It's accurate," Grant said. Leo looked both pleased and mildly surprised, the way children do when an adult says something correct without being coached. Most grown-ups just say nice. They don't actually look. "I looked," Grant said. "Why are you here?" Leo asked, not unkindly, just direct. Grant had prepared several versions of an answer for this on the drive over. None of them felt right now, that he was standing in front of a child who was clearly not going to accept anything less than the truth. "Someone told me this place mattered," he said. "I wanted to see it for myself." Leo thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "It does matter," he said. "Frances cries every time she thinks they're going to close us. She pretends she's not, but everyone can tell." He lowered his voice. "She cries about the card table especially. She's been playing there since before I was born." Something settled heavily in Grant's chest and did not move. He was still standing there. Leo had returned to Jupiter, satisfied that the visitor had passed some invisible test, when Grant noticed Sloane through the interior window, helping younger children fold paper cranes. She had her back to him. He watched her crouch to a small girl's level, guiding tiny hands patiently through the creases. He left before she turned around. The board meeting was exactly as unpleasant as Vera had predicted. Clifford Pratt presented the acquisition timeline with the brisk confidence of a man who had never once considered that a profitable decision might also be a wrong one. "I'd like to propose a pause," Grant said. The room rearranged itself. "A pause," Clifford repeated. "The community impact assessment is 3 paragraphs and a phrase I find legally adequate but morally empty." Grant set the file on the table. "I visited the site." Clifford's expression suggested this was roughly equivalent to a confession. "That isn't standard procedure." "No, it isn't. I'm finding that standard procedure has significant gaps." Grant looked around the table. "I'm requesting a full review. Alternative site assessment, genuine community consultation, exploration of renovation financing options, 60 days. The vote was 7-2. 7 in favor of proceeding as scheduled. Grant and a quiet board member named Audrey Walsh were outvoted before the sentence was finished. The eviction notice went out that afternoon. The notice arrived at the Arts Hub on a Thursday morning. Sloane read it standing at the front desk, while Frances watched from across the room without saying anything, which was its own kind of answer. "Oh," Sloane said. Just that one syllable. She folded the letter, set it down, walked to the back room, sat on a paint-stained chair, and pressed both hands flat against her knees for 30 seconds. Joe found her there. Joe, who had caused this entire chain of events by refusing to attend the gala, now sat on the floor beside Sloane's chair without speaking, which was exactly the right thing to do. "We still have the community meeting," Sloane said finally. 2 weeks. Then we fight." Her voice had gone quiet in the way voices do when they've moved past panic into something steadier. "They want the building. We'll make very clear what's in it." The community meeting at Kensington Public Library drew more people than the room had been built to hold. Parents stood along the back wall. Frances was in the front row with her card-playing partner and a hand-lettered sign that read, "This is our home," in red letters. Leo sat beside her, looking solemn in the way children do when they understand that something serious is happening to the place they love. Sloane presented without notes. She'd started with notes and abandoned them for the same reason she'd abandoned them twice before at city planning consultations. The notes made her sound like she was trying to convince people of something, and she wasn't. She was trying to show them what was already real. She talked about Frances and the card table. She talked about Leo and Jupiter. She talked about the teenager with the emotional weather system painting, who had been on a child counseling waitlist for 9 months, but still came to the hub every Tuesday and Thursday because it was somewhere she could put things down. She talked about what the building was, not what it was worth per square meter, what it was. Then Clifford Pratt stood and delivered a presentation about urban density and projected municipal tax revenue, and used the phrase community transition pathway with a composure that suggested he genuinely believed it described something real. "The decision has been made," Clifford said. "The timeline is set. We understand this is difficult news for some residents." For some residents, Sloane was composing her response, carefully, because composure was a tool and she needed all her tools right now, when the doors at the back of the library opened. Grant Whitmore walked in. The room shifted. Several people who recognized the name on the eviction notice clearly recognized the man walking down the aisle. Clifford Pratt went very still in the way of someone who has just realized the situation has changed in a way that was not on his schedule. Grant met Sloane's eyes from halfway across the room. He stopped. She looked at him, then at Clifford, then back at Grant. "You," she said. "Yes," he said. "Whitmore Development is your company." "Yes." She said nothing for a moment. The room had gone very quiet. "You sat across from me at that gala. I told you everything." "I know." "Did you know who I was that night?" "Not that night," he said. "I found out afterward." "And then you sent the eviction notice anyway." "The board sent it. I voted against it." He took a step forward. "I know exactly how that sounds." "It sounds like the company still has your name on it," Sloane said. "It does." He stopped 2 rows from the front, "which is why I'm here." He turned to address the room. His voice was steady, though his hands were not. Sloane noticed this and didn't quite know what to do with it. "My name is Grant Whitmore," he said. "My company holds the development rights to this block. 6 weeks ago, I approved that acquisition without reading the community impact documentation carefully enough." He paused. "That is not an excuse, that is an admission." He opened a folder. "Tonight I'd like to propose something different." Clifford stood. "Mr. Whitmore, this is not the appropriate forum." "I think it's exactly the appropriate forum," Grant said. "What I have here is an alternative proposal. Whitmore Development finances the full renovation of this building, structural upgrades, expanded program space, accessibility improvements. The Arts Hub retains its lease on updated terms. The development project is relocated to a site on Sterling Road that was assessed and dismissed for reasons that no longer apply." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Leo, who had apparently decided community meetings operated on the same rules as classroom discussions, said loudly from the front row, "Does that mean Jupiter stays?" Frances pulled him close and said very quietly, "Yes, baby, Jupiter stays." The room erupted. Outside afterward, in October air that smelled like wood smoke and lake water. Sloane found Grant on the pavement, looking like a man who wasn't sure he'd done enough, but had done everything he could. "The board is going to push back," she said. "They already have," he said. "I expected it." Clifford looked like he was going to combust. "Clifford will adjust or resign. Either outcome is workable." He turned to face her. "I should have told you at the gala. When you mentioned the hub, when you said Whitmore development, I recognized it and I said nothing. I wanted to fix it before you knew it was me." A pause. "I understand that was wrong." Sloane looked at him for a long moment. The streetlight was doing that same unfair thing it had done 2 weeks ago, outs the Four Seasons, and she was just as annoyed at it now. "You're right that it was wrong," she said. "Not telling me that was wrong." "I know. But walking into that room tonight wasn't." He said nothing. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know that too. I don't know how long I'll be angry." "That seems fair." A streetcar went past on College Street. Frances and Leo came out of the library doors. Frances with her sign tucked under her arm. Leo solemn but with the beginning of something lighter coming through. "Mister," Leo said, stopping in front of Grant, "are you actually going to keep it open?" "I'm going to try very hard," Grant said. Leo considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Trying isn't the same as doing," he said, by way of verdict, and walked away with Frances. Sloane watched them go. "He's 8 years old." "He's right," Grant said. She looked at him sideways. "We're going to have to work together, on the renovation. If you'll allow it." "You're going to argue with me constantly." "Probably," he said. "And you're going to be right constantly, which is going to be very inconvenient for my general sense of confidence." Despite everything, despite the eviction notice still folded in her pocket, despite the anger still coiled somewhere in her chest, despite the fact that this was complicated in ways she hadn't yet finished counting. Sloane laughed, short and real. "Don't push it, Whitmore," she said. "Never," he said. Clifford Pratt resigned from the board 6 weeks later, citing a desire to pursue other professional interests. His departure was announced on a Monday. By Wednesday, the Sterling Road site had been formally approved as the alternate development location. By Friday, the renovation contract for the Augusta Avenue building had been signed. Grant brought the documents to the Arts Hub himself. Sloane was in the program room with the seniors, who were learning watercolor, with a ferocity that suggested they considered it a competitive sport. He waited. Frances noticed him first and raised her eyebrows in a way that communicated a great deal without saying anything. When the class broke for tea, Sloane came out. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. "It's done?" she said. "It's done." She opened it, read every page with the careful focus of someone who'd been burned by small print before and intended never to be again. Then she set the documents down and looked out at Augusta Avenue. At the November afternoon, the bare trees, the very specific quality of late autumn Toronto light, and was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "The building does the work," Grant said. "I just got out of its way." Sloane turned back to him. "That might be the first modest thing I've heard you say. Don't get used to it." She almost smiled. "I still don't entirely trust you." "I know." He put his hands in his pockets. "I'm hoping that changes." "It might," she said, and then, because she was honest, always honestly, "it probably will." The renovation took 4 months. Grant attended every site review. Sloane attended every one as well, and they argued productively about nearly every decision from ceiling height to window trim. The community voted on the paint color and chose a warm terracotta that neither of them had suggested, which Sloane accepted with grace and Grant accepted, because Leo pointed out the solar system mural would look excellent against it, which was objectively correct. The night they got trapped at the hub during a February ice storm, power out, 2 flashlights between them, ice ticking steadily against the windows. They sat on the program room floor and talked about things that had nothing to do with renovation timelines. Grant told her about the architecture degree he'd spent 3 weeks mourning when he was 23, before deciding grief was inefficient. She told him about growing up in a neighborhood with no after-school programs, about understanding at age 9 that the spaces you needed didn't just exist. Someone had to fight for them, every single time. He kissed her when the power came back on and the lights flickered into existence, because it seemed, somehow, like exactly the right moment for something honest. She kissed him back, which seemed like the answer to several questions he hadn't known how to ask. "This is complicated," she said afterward. "Everything worth having is," he said. "That's a bumper sticker." "It's also true." She pulled back to look at him. "We have to be careful. People will say you're doing all of this for the wrong reasons." "People already said that," he said. "I didn't stop." "No," she agreed, "you didn't." The Kensington Arts Hub reopened on a Saturday in June. The terracotta walls were warm in the afternoon light. Jupiter gleamed across the entire back wall, completed at last. All the storm bands rendered with a precision that Leo's painting teacher described as frankly alarming for a 9-year-old. Frances was at the card table with 3 friends playing a warm-up hand, her sign from the community meeting framed and hung beside the front entrance. Joe had organized the entire celebration with the exhausting competence of someone making up for a gala she'd refused to attend 9 months earlier. There were food stands and a live quartet and a small bouncy castle that Leo had lobbied for with the tireless conviction of someone who understood leverage. Grant stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching Sloane move through the crowd. She stopped to talk to everyone. She crouched to Leo's level. She helped Frances adjust her chair. She laughed at something Joe said, and the sound carried across the afternoon the way sounds do on a day that is decided to be generous. He walked over. She turned, and her face settled into the particular expression she reserved for moments when she was genuinely happy and knew it. "Jupiter looks magnificent," he said. "Jupiter is magnificent, and Leo will never let us forget it," she said. He looked around, at the terracotta walls, at the solar system, at the seniors, at the teenagers whose portfolio work was displayed on the courtyard fence. At what 4 months and a great deal of stubbornness, most of it hers, had done to a building that had been 12 days from demolition. He reached into his jacket pocket. Sloane noticed. Her eyes went to his hand. "If this is another renovation document," she said carefully, "I will need a moment." "It isn't," he said. He opened the small box. The ring was simple. He'd spent 3 weeks getting that part right, because he knew her well enough by now to understand that she would see through anything that was trying too hard, just as she saw through everything that didn't mean what it claimed to. "I know this is quite public," he said, "and that Leo is watching from approximately 10 feet away." "He absolutely is," she confirmed, without looking. "And that you'll probably want to argue about the timing. But I have never in my life failed to read something this important. I've looked at it from every angle." He met her eyes. "Sloane Abernathy, will you marry me?" She was quiet for exactly the length of time it takes to be certain the answer is true. "Yes," she said, "you absolute disaster of a man, yes." Leo's cheer reached them before they'd even finished the moment. Frances set down her cards and pressed both palms together with the quiet certainty of someone who had been expecting this since February. Joe burst into tears with a swiftness that suggested she'd been ready since the ice storm, possibly before. The ring fit. The afternoon held. And in the courtyard of a building that had been weeks from disappearing forever, with Jupiter watching from the back wall and Frances finally not crying about anything at all, 2 people who were never supposed to share a table at a charity gala began the life they'd spent 9 months accidentally building toward. Together, stubbornly, and without the faintest intention of stopping.